Gracious good evening, extremely beautiful minds. Uh, we are in the middle of a unit where we are trying to analyze what essentially is bad argumentation. We have bad argumentation from Adolf Hitler. We have bad argumentation from Richard Nixon. Reading these, understanding why it's bad argumentation is part of our multi-step process to do our final essay, which is where we have good argumentation. And so we can avoid the bad argumentation because we recognize it in Hitler and Nixon, and we can see bad argumentation in one another's papers so that we can revise it, help them revise it so that it is good argumentation. But this is analysis of essentially bad argumentation. I'm going to share the screen, and we're going to take a look at what our assignment is and where we're at, where we're going. As you can see, today is March the 7th. We are reading the Nixon essay before class and doing exercise 5.4c. And then I'm going to read it aloud. We're going to analyze it as a whole class. And we're going to do exercise 5.4c in our groups, trying to come up with a thesis for our analysis paper. Next time, we're going to read 2 previous student essays that attempt to analyze Nixon and analyze Hitler. We're going to call them Student Theta and Student Iota. And we're going to analyze those and evaluate them and see if they're good grades or bad grades. This will help us see the strengths and the weaknesses of previous students. And that really is a kind of dry run for after spring break, doing an in-class revision, 5.4z as it's called, of our one another's papers. We've had the practice by Theta and Iota on the 9th, and now we are going to read one another's papers and give great feedback so that when we revise and hand it in on March the 23rd, that it is as good as it could possibly be. Hopefully an A+ for every student. So that's the broad outline of what we're doing. Today, we're just going to dive in, as is our tradition, and I'm going to read the introduction, and I'm going to read sections aloud. You've had the opportunity to try to find the fallacies, Easter egg hunt the fallacies, but you're going to pick up some, and others are going to pick up some, and I'm going to pick up some, and together we can deeply analyze this Nixon speech, much the same way we analyzed the chapter of Mein Kampf, Hitler. And then at the end of the hour, I'll get us in groups. And at the very end, I will remind us what we're doing for Wednesday. Questions or comments as we proceed with all that? Okay. I am snowy white in my face because I'm getting glare from the screen reading this text. This introduction is from Schmoop. It is snarky and playful and hipster, and it's kind of nice. The bad news is it has some grammar errors I'm not responsible for. In 1952, Vice President wannabe Richard M. Nixon was in deep trouble. Nixon, the mighty avenger of corruption in politics, had just been accused of having a secret slush fund that kept his wife in fancy clothes and had the Nixons living way beyond their means. Yep, that's the same Richard Nixon who was elected president in 1968 and resigned in disgrace in 1974, the only president to resign. But in 1952, Nixon was just a senator and a veteran of modest means in the world of McCarthy-era politics, making his name in the Senate as an anti-corruption and anti-communist crusader. So to give you context, this was during the early part of the Cold War. It was after World War II. And there were two big sort of enemies staring at each other in the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union. The United States, of course, was a democracy. The Soviet Union was a communistic, I would say, dictatorship, that kind of thing. There was a scare in America that there were people in government and in the military and in business that were communists. That is, they were secretly sympathizing with the Russians. They might even be Russian spies. Turns out there were some Russian spies. But it became a witch hunt. A senator by the name of Joseph McCarthy began a series of investigations where he would ask people, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party, right? And so, of course, it wasn't illegal to be a communist, but it was career killing if it was proven you were a communist in this witch hunt era. Nixon was for all that. He also believed that the democratic regime of first FDR and then Harry Truman was in fact corrupt. That is to say, there was, people on the tape making money, corruption, and he was an anti-corruption and anti-communist crusader. But he had his sights set on higher office. Having secured the Republican presidential nomination, Dwight D. Eisenhower was in need of a running mate. Now, backstory of Dwight D. Eisenhower, he was the great hero of World War II. He was not only the supreme commander of American forces, he was the supreme commander of all the Allied forces, including the Brits and the Free French and the Polish and whoever was still around. He was in charge, the Australians, he was in charge of all of it. So he was a great war hero, and then he came back and everyone knew he'd be president. He chose the Republican Party and looked like he had a pretty good chance. Nixon, a young and charismatic rising star of the Republican Party, was a natural choice due to his hardline stance against the Russians, and their global communist agenda. Well, we can see in latest news that the Russians sometimes can be a little aggressive. They just see other countries and they go, mine, that country is mine, comrade, like that. The Eisenhower-Nixon ticket promised to be an antidote to the corruption they saw running rampant in the Democratic government, the Democrats, and a replacement for the soft on communism Truman administration. Then came a bombshell. In the midst of election campaign, the New York Post ran an article titled, "Secret Rich Men's Trust Fund Keeps Nixon in Style Far Beyond His Salary." The article alleged that Nixon had access to a hidden fund of $18,000 that he was using to live large. Nixon did, in fact, have a fund provided by some wealthy buddies that he used to defray political expenses that weren't covered by his Senate allowance. It wasn't illegal, but it raised some ethical questions, especially considering the anti-corruption was the centerpiece of the Republican campaign. So basically, people secretly gave him money, which he put into a secret pile, and he would spend it on secret things. And that is all highly suspicious, if not illegal. The scandal threatened to blow up the Republican Party, generating outrage from voters and prompting party members to demand that Nixon be removed from the 1952 ticket. This is not good in the middle of a presidential election. Even Eisenhower hoped he'd resign and stave off further damage to the party's chances to win back the White House. Nixon knew he had to do some major damage control before this thing ran away from him completely. He decided to take his case straight to the American people. The Republican Party purchased some television time, and Nixon addressed the nation in a speech that he hoped would prove to the nation that he was an honest man. Financially struggling just like them, who'd never think of cheating his constituents by accepting gifts or secret cash for personal use or for political influence. People give money to politicians in order for the politicians to do things for them. So here's the speech. I have excerpted it and edited it from this website here. I was tempted to read it as Nixon would say it, but I won't do that. But every now and then I'm going to stop and ask questions so that you all can do the share in the analysis. My fellow Americans, I come before you tonight as a candidate for the vice presidency and as a man whose honesty and integrity have been questioned. Now, the usual political thing to do when charges are made against you is either to ignore them or deny them without giving details. So when you say of all possibilities, there's really only two possibilities. What fallacy might that be?
Either or.
Either or. In fact, Nixon says either or. So he says there's only two things to do, and they're both bad. And he's implying also later, that's the kind of thing that Democrats would do. But he's going to do the third way that no politician ever does, because he's not really a politician. He's so pure and good and holy. I believe we've had enough of that in the United States, particularly with the present administration in Washington, D.C. My opponents, those darn Democrats, that's the kind of thing they do. So he's the one under suspicion, and he is casting suspicion on the other team. To me, the office of the vice presidency of the United States is a great office, and I feel that the people who have got to have confidence in the integrity of the men who run for that office and who might obtain it. Okay, so what tone is or persona is Nixon taking on right here? How is he relating to the reader, to the listener?
I mean, he's trying to portray himself as an American and say like he's genuine and he has his struggles too.
Okay, we haven't got there yet. I just mean so far.
Oh,
so far, what tone is he taking?
I guess he's trying to seem like an honest man so far, maybe.
Yes, I've been smeared, and I'm honest, and I'm the kind of guy that will, talk to you honestly about it. And I'm honest in my honesty because I'm honest, right? And I want you to have confidence in me because I'm honest. I have a theory too that the best and only answer to a smear, so he's basically saying his opponents are smearing him and he's a victim, or to an honest misunderstanding of the facts, some of his audience, they don't have a smear against him, is to tell the truth. And that's why I'm here tonight. So he's here tonight to tell the truth. But then he says something that sounds very lawyerly. I want to tell you my side of the case. What's the tone and connotation between I want to tell you the truth and I want to tell you my side of the case?
I mean, that's complicated, I guess, but it's like when you say you're going to tell someone your side of the story, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily right. It just means it's what you believe.
Exactly. So he's like, I'm the defendant. I'm going to tell my defendant side, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the truth. And so he's saying two slightly different things here at the same time. And that makes me say, well, which one is it, Nixon? I'm sure that you've read the charge and you've heard it that I, Senator Nixon, took $18,000 from a group of my supporters. Now, I want you to know that as we are reading this whole speech, that is the issue. He's going to go off and talk about a million other things, but the question is, what about that $18,000? Is it right to have taken it? That's the question we're asking of Nixon, and we need to keep that in the forefront of our minds because he's going to go everywhere else to get us to not remember that. Now, was that wrong? So he's admitting he took it. Now he's just asking that was it wrong? And let me say that it was wrong. I'm saying, incidentally, that it was wrong and not just illegal. So think about two levels of badness. Wrong is the lowest level, illegal is the highest level, because something can be legal but still wrong, right? So he admits it's wrong, and he admits that what he did was illegal. Any problems with that in a speech where you're trying to prove you're innocent and you're honest?
Well, you should never admit to being wrong if you want to prove that you're not.
Yeah. Now, this wasn't part of his written speech. He just blundered at the beginning, panicked, and he said this. I want to know how in the world you recover when people are thinking that you are guilty as hell. How in the world do you recover when you start out by saying, yeah, I was wrong, and I was, what I did was illegal? But even though he blunders here, he goes on. So I would call this self-contradiction. When you say what I did was wrong and it was illegal, but now I'm going to tell you why it was neither wrong nor illegal. That's probably not a good plan. Okay.
Could it be a false appeal to logic as well?
Could it be a what?
Could it be like a false appeal to logos, kind of? I mean, like, not majorly. I don't, it just seems like it doesn't really make any sense logically to say that and then be like, but because of this, it's not. That was what confused me about this paragraph. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, he didn't mean to say that which is in gray right there.
Yeah.
He never intended to say that, but under the pressure of the moment and the camera and the sweat, he blurted this out. And so by definition, it's a self-contradiction of everything else. But it's fascinating that you had him actually admit it on TV and still, with this speech, win the day and have everyone support him. Anyway, he says, because it isn't a question of whether it was legal or illegal, that isn't enough. The question is, was it morally wrong? Now he's turned it around and he's saying, I'm not just going to prove that it wasn't illegal. I'm going to prove it wasn't even wrong. So it was neither illegal nor wrong. So in basically 4 sentences, he has done self-contradiction. Okay. I say that it was morally wrong. Now, let's say that someone has stolen money from you, knocked you down, took your money out of your purse or your wallet. And the police arrest them and in front of you. And the person looks at you and says, I'm going to define whether what I did was wrong or not. And I'm going to use these criteria. Any problems with that?
I said it was a false appeal to ethos whenever he was doing this, because he's trying to tell you what is the definition of right and wrong throughout the essay.
Perfect. He is, by definition, the last person on the planet to define whether what he did was wrong or not, when he is the one under suspicion, right? The law tells you whether it's legal or illegal. Society tells you whether it's right or wrong, not the perpetrator, right? Or the potential perpetrator. But here's his 3 reasons why it wasn't wrong. I say that it was morally wrong if any of that $18,000 went to Senator Nixon for my personal use. So what he's going to end up saying is, I did not use it for personal use. Therefore, it's not wrong. I say that it was morally wrong if it was secretly given or secretly handled. So what he's going to say later is, it wasn't secretly given and it wasn't secretly handled. And I say that it was morally wrong if any of the contributors got special favors for the contributions they made. There's a lot of sort of bad or rather good reasons to give money to a politician. But some of what you would do to give money to a politician, you expect something back sometimes. And that is called bribery. You give money to a politician with the understanding that that politician will do certain things for you that only a politician can do. That is illegal. So those are the 3 things he's going to try to disprove about this $18,000. And in the next paragraph, he kind of takes a stab at it. And now to answer these questions, let me say this. Not 1 cent of the $18,000 or any other money of that type ever went to me for my personal use. Okay, so he's saying, I did not use a penny of that money for personal use. Any problems with that insofar as being convincing argumentation? You're saying I didn't do it.
Couldn't it also be ambiguity though, if you're like trying to read into it?
Yeah, maybe. He could be saying not 1 cent. I spent all of it. I didn't just spend 1 cent. That's kind of a Bill Clinton type thing, right? So it could be that.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that until you said it.
Yeah, someone else is saying something. Sorry, go ahead.
I thought maybe begging the question.
That's it, begging the question. So if your proof is that you didn't do something immoral, if you say, I didn't do something immoral, and that's your proof, that's just begging the question. Then he says, every penny of it was used to pay for political expenses that I did not think should be charged to the taxpayers. So he's saying he used that money for political expenses, and his reason was he did not want to take money from you, the taxpayers. It's all about you. He wants you to have more money. He doesn't want you to be taxed so much. What kind of argument is that, would you say? What kind of fallacy might that be?
Appeal to pathos?
Good. It's an appeal to pathos. He's looking out for you. He's caring for you. You should feel gratitude. Later, he says, I didn't feel it should be charged to the government. But to be fair, if it was charged to the government would just take it out of your pocket as a taxpayer. So he did it for you. He took this money for you. It's all about you. It was not a secret fund. Okay, that's his assertion. Here's his evidence. As a matter of fact, when I was on Meet the Press, some of you may have seen last Sunday, Peter Edson came up to me after the program and he said, Dick, what about this fund we hear about? And I said, well, there's no secret about it. Go out and see Dana Smith, who's the administrator of the fund. And I gave Edson Smith's address. And I said, you will find that the purpose of the fund simply was to defray political expenses that I did not feel should be charged to the government. Okay. So he's saying it's not secret. It wasn't a secret fund because after it was published that I secretly took money and built a secret fund. After that, a reporter asked me about it, and I told him it wasn't a secret fund. So what's wrong with that argument?
I mean, he kept it a secret until he got caught, basically.
Yes. It was a secret until he was caught, and then he said, see, it's not a secret because the reporters were asking me about it because they heard about it. In what way does he seem to be using the respected news person, Peter Edson, here? In what way does he seem to be using him in this argument?
A false sense of ethos or appeal to ethos.
Yeah, he's in the ring and he says, Peter Edson will back me up on this. Well, we don't know what Peter Edson thinks. Peter Edson was suspicious of Nixon or he wouldn't have asked the question. But the fact that he just had a conversation with Edson about it, saying it wasn't a secret fund, now he's a respected ethos that Nixon is citing. And third, let me point out, and I want to make this particularly clear, that no contributor of this fund, no contributor to any of my campaigns has ever received any consideration that he would not have received as an ordinary constituent. that he would not have received as an ordinary constituent. So what that means is, if a random guy came up to Nixon and said, I'm in your district, could you please vote for this bill or go see this administrator for me? Nixon might do that for an ordinary constituent. But if someone gave him thousands of dollars and then said, go vote or help me out with this agency, in Nixon's mind, he would be doing it just like he would for an ordinary constituent, and therefore it's not a bribe. And we know this is valid because it's in Nixon's head, and he's the one telling us that he would do whatever he did for the people that paid him to do it. He would do that for an ordinary constituent, therefore is moral. Problems with that? Okay.
I mean, you probably shouldn't even be saying that you would do that in the first place.
Yeah, he kind of just admitted that if they gave him money and asked him to do something, that he did it. Just as I would do it for anyone. I just don't believe in that. And I can say that never, while I've been in the Senate of the United States, as far as the people that contributed to this fund are concerned, have I made a telephone call for them to an agency, or have I gone down to an agency on their behalf? There's a lot of things you could have a politician do for you, but he is citing some very narrow and specific things and say, I didn't do that. It's like saying, when I robbed that bank, I didn't spend that money on bubble gum. I guarantee you that. Well, could have been other things you did for them. And then he says, and the records will show that, the records which are in the hands of the administration. So let me get this straight. Nixon is saying he didn't make a phone call to an agency, and he didn't go to any office of an agency on behalf of a donor. And the records will show what he didn't do. And the administration has these records, and they know he's innocent because they have the proof that he never did these things. What's that an example of? The administration can prove he didn't murder that person at 2 a.m.
It's proving a negative, right?
Yeah, it's proving a negative. How could they possibly have records of what he didn't do? I doubt the president has records of every phone call and every visit to every agency anyway. But he's being conspiratorial by saying they know this. It's in the hands of the administration. So I felt the best way to handle these necessary political expenses of getting my message to the American people, and the speeches I made, the speeches that I had printed for the most part concerned this one message of exposing this administration, the communism in it, the corruption in it. The only way I could do that was to accept the aid which people in my home state of California who contributed to my campaign and who continued to make these contributions after I was elected were glad to make. So he's implying what he spent the money on. What he spent the money on was printing up things so that he could expose the Democrats are corrupt and they're communists. That's a lot of printing costs. You know, $18,000 may not seem like much to you guys. I bet it does. You're university students. But 10 years, 11 years after this happened, my dad bought a house that I grew up in. The house cost $14,000. So you're talking about enough to buy a crapping house here. And that was for printing so he could stop communism and stop corruption, which are his two big things. So this is really just advertising how valuable he is and what he does. And let me say, I'm proud of the fact that not one of them has ever asked me for a special favor. Okay, That's an assertion. What's your proof? But at least he's saying they've never even asked. Now, look what he says next, which contradicts it. I'm proud of the fact that not one of them has ever asked me to vote on a bill other than of my own conscience would dictate. So they say, Nixon, we want you to vote on a bill. We're going to give you thousands of dollars. And Nixon thinks about it and he goes, well, I would have done that anyway. And he takes the money. But you have Nixon's word. What's going on in his mind was he has absolute integrity and he wouldn't have done that if he didn't already want to do it. And I'm proud of the fact that taxpayers by subterfuge or otherwise have never paid one dime of expenses, which I thought were political and shouldn't be charged to the taxpayers. Well, he said that for the third time. Then he says, I want the American people to know all the facts. I'm not afraid of having any people go in and check the facts. And that is exactly what they did. He says they've gone in, they've checked the facts, they've done an audit. What proof is there of that? It's just a statement. And if they checked it, why don't they release the audit? Well, there's no evidence that any of that happened. And he says they're smearing me, but some people may have an honest misunderstanding on the matter. And they may say, well, maybe you were able, Senator, to fake this thing. How can we believe what you say? There's a possibility that maybe you got some sums in cash. There's a possibility you may have feathered your own nest. So he says, now what I'm going to do, and incidentally, this is unprecedented in the history of American politics. I am going at this time to give you the television and radio audience a complete financial history of everything I've earned, everything I've spent, everything I own, and I want you to know the facts. Okay, let's get back to the issue. Remind me what the issue is again.
It's the $18,000 that he
The $18,000. So what the poop is a complete financial history of everything I've earned, everything I've spent, and everything I own from the time I was born in 1913. What is that? The rest of the essay an example of?
Shifting terms, right?
Yeah, it's shifting terms because, yeah, he's going from one concept to another. But what do you call it when you're just trying to distract someone and get someone off the case? Get them.
Oh, is that, are you saying that's a red herring?
The whole rest of the speech is a red herring. He never mentions the $18,000 again. But what he does do is he's trying to use everything he can to get the audience to like him and to get the audience to see how honest he is. So that's what the rest of it is about. So he says, I'll have to start early. Why? I was born in 1913. Who cares? He says, our family was one of modest circumstances, and most of my early life was spent in a store in East Whittier. It was a grocery store, one of those family enterprises. The only reason we were making it go is because my mother and dad had 5 boys and we all worked in the store. So he's saying it's a family store. Does that make it poor? You realize Walmart is a family store, right? You realize that Mardell is owned by a family, right? So we don't know how wealthy this is, but he's just saying, I and my family worked hard for a living. Why? Because he wants to appeal to all those hardworking families and get them to like him. I worked my way through college. Anyone working their way through college goes, well, I like him now. And law school. Then 1940, probably the best thing that ever happened to me happened. I married Pat, who's sitting over there. What does the fact that he loves his wife have to do with the $18,000 or any financial aspect? Why does he say it? Who is he appealing to?
Married people.
Yeah, married people or women say, oh, he loves his wife, right? We had a rather difficult time after we were married, like so many young couples who may be listening to us. Anybody who's young married, who's struggling financially, all of a sudden they're like, Well, Nixon's just like us. I practice law. She continued to teach school. Okay, all school teachers are going, oh, I'm for Pat now. Then in 1952, I went to the service. Let me say that my service record was not a particularly unusual one. So he's saying I wasn't a big deal. But then notice what he says. I went to the South Pacific. I guess I'm entitled to a couple of battle stars. Battle star is when you get an award for having been in the middle of a battle where you could have gotten killed.
Yeah, I just realized he said he went to law school too, and that's like not cheap at all.
Exactly. And he says that he didn't pay for all of law school. But anyway, what about the problem that he deserves a couple of battle stars from the U.S. Army? Any problems with that? What question do you have with Nixon?
Why is he entitled to it?
Why is he entitled to it? If he is, why doesn't he have them? The Army didn't give them to him. So this is kind of skeptical. I got a couple of letters of commendation, but I was just there when the bombs were falling. Well, that's milking the pathos. I was there when the bombs were falling. I'm no hero, but I saw the bombs. And then I returning to the United States. Let's salute the flag. And in 1946, I ran for the Congress. When we came out of the war, Pat during the war had worked as a stenographer in a bank and an economist for a government agency. And when we came out, the total of our savings and so on was very little bit. So then he goes on talking about all of these financial details, which I can't keep track of and no one else can either. But the net effect is, I think he had 3 houses, right? How many poor people have 3 houses? Secondly, he never mentions how much money he makes as a senator. That's never in his equation. You got to ask why. Is it because they make quite a bit and that would make him look not as poor? But the effect is he's trying to let you know that he owes all this money and he doesn't have very much. And what charge might that relate to against him in the 3? He said it's not secret. And I didn't use it for my personal use. If he had taken the money, he wouldn't owe so much. Make sense? He even says, I'm letting my folks live in the house in California. Oh, he's a good son. Are they paying rent? Well, we don't know. Okay. Then he says, well, that's about it. That's what we have. And again, none of it relates to 18,000. That's what we owe. It isn't very much. But Pat and I have the satisfaction that every dime we got is honestly ours. Well, that's the assertion, isn't it? He hasn't proven anything yet of the 18,000. And here's a real curveball. I should say this, that Pat doesn't have a mink coat. What's the implication? If he had taken that money, he would have bought Pat a mink coat. Since Pat doesn't have a mink coat, he didn't spend it on personal things. Maybe he spent it, he just is a cheapskate and didn't buy her a mink coat. But that's supposedly the proof that she doesn't have a mink coat. But she does have a respectable Republican cloth coat. So now Republicans wear cloth coats because they don't take bribes. But presumably Democrats do have mink coats for their wives because they are corrupt. Notice the insidious attack there with no evidence. And I always tell her she'll look good in anything. Oh, he loves his wife. They love each other. He thinks his wife is pretty. Let's vote for her. One other thing I probably should tell you, because if I don't, they'll probably be saying this about me too. We did get something, a gift after the election. Okay, finally, he's confessing to a sin. A man down in Texas heard Pat on the radio mention the fact that 2 youngsters would like to have a dog. And believe it or not, the day before we left on this campaign trip, we got a message from Union Station in Baltimore saying they had a package for us. We went down to get it. You know what it was? It was a little Cocker Spaniel dog in a crate that he'd sent all the way from Texas, black and white spotted. And our little girl, Trisha, the 6-year-old, named it Checkers. And you know, the kids, like all kids, love the dog. And I just want to say this right now, that regardless of what they say about it, we're going to keep it. What's going on here? What technique?
False appeal to pathos. I know that.
False appeal to pathos. What kinds of pathos?
I mean, like you're trying to make them feel happy about the dog, kind of, in a way. And like, oh, he loves his family. He's going to let him keep the dog.
Exactly. First of all, the love of the dog. Oh, they have a dog. He couldn't possibly have taken money and spent it on personal use if they have a dog, right? And the little girl loves it. Oh, how cute. And you know what? He's such a brave father to say he will stand up against those Democrats smearing him and he will keep the dog. Oh, how brave, how fatherly of him. Wow. This is called the Checker speech unofficially because of this red herring. It's not a dog, it's a herring, it's a fish. It isn't easy to come before a nationwide audience and bare your life as I've done. No, he's proven nothing. But I want to say some things before I conclude and think most of you will agree on. Well, he goes on this little spiel saying the Democrats are basically saying you have to be rich to run for Senate. And he's saying you don't have to be rich. Those guys are rich. Governor Stevenson, who's running for presidency, is rich. But you can just be a poor guy like me and run for president. A man of modest means can also run for president because, you know, remember Abraham Lincoln. What does Abraham Lincoln have to do with the claim that Nixon is poor and honest? Oh, Honest Abe is poor and honest. So all of a sudden we got Abraham Lincoln standing in the corner saying, I endorse Nixon, right? God must have loved the common people who made so many of them. Then he says, they're going to try to stop me. They're going to try to shut me down. This is just them trying to silence me because I'm trying to stop corruption and communism. And I'm doing this because I love my country. And the only one who could save the country is Dwight Eisenhower, his running mate. Gee, how might that benefit him? Gee, I wonder. And I say the only man who can lead us in this fight to rid the government of both those who are communists and those who corrupt the government is Eisenhower. Eisenhower can do it. And I'm not going to quit. I don't believe I ought to quit because I'm not a quitter. What's that an example of as a logical fallacy?
It's circular logic.
Circular logic. Remember, circular starts with an assertion, goes in a circle, and says because, and it restates the assertion. I'm not going to quit because I'm not a quitter. Really, it's another way of saying I'm not going to quit because I'm not going to quit. And incidentally, Pat's not a quitter. After all, her name was Patricia Ryan, and she was born on St. Patrick's Day. And you know the Irish never quit. Well, let's start with this. Her name is Patricia Ryan, and she was born on St. Patrick's Day. Does that make her Irish?
No.
So we don't even know she's Irish. She was, in fact, but that's kind of lame. And you know the Irish never quit. What fallacy is that?
Stereotyping.
Stereotyping. You know, all blue people drink, you know, crack cocaine. You know, it's that. Now, why did he say that? He wants the Irish to be on his side. Just like he wants poor young people to be on his side who are married. He just like he wants, and so on. Then he says, it's not my decision. I'm going to completely leave it up to the Republican National Committee. It's just up to them. Okay, fair enough. But then he says, but I'm going to ask you to try to give them hell. Wire them and tell them whether you think I should stay on the ticket or not. Well, he doesn't want them to wire them if he wants them to get off the ticket. Basically saying, I'm going to stay out of this and let them decide, but would you please give them hell until they let me back on the ticket? That's self-contradiction. Then he says, let me say this, regardless of what happens, I'm going to continue this fight. He's going to continue to campaign. Well, if they tell him not to campaign, how can he say I'm leaving it up to them, but I'm going to continue to campaign? I'm going to campaign to drive the crooks and the communists. That's his two big platforms, corruption and communism. And those that defend them out of Washington. And remember, folks, Eisenhower is a great man, believe me. Now, this is weird because Nixon is trying to say, you should trust me because Eisenhower picked me and everyone loves and respects Eisenhower. And I am telling you, Eisenhower's a great man, trust me. Well, that's literally circular, right? You should trust me because Eisenhower picked me, and I'm telling you, you should trust Eisenhower, circular. And a vote for Eisenhower is what's good for America. Okay, so what we're going to do now is remember, we are going to take a look at 5.4c. And our objective is to come up with a thesis for our analysis research paper. And the thesis, as you remember, is author's name and name of, I've changed this a little bit so you can see it better. I plopped this in here. Author's name and name of essay is unconvincing in his thesis that author's thesis, that is to say, in this case, Nixon's thesis, because of his tendency to. So groups are going to say, what is Nixon's thesis? You're going to disagree. You're going to, merge ideas. You're going to come up with each of you a thesis of your own. They can be the same or they can be different. And that would be plopped right there. Then you're going to say, what are the weaknesses with the thesis? Right? So let's do 3 or 4 of them. And you'd plop that right there. Then you're going to write the thesis. Nixon, in the Chequers speech, is unconvincing that his thesis is, that's right there, because of his tendency to, what are the top 3 or 4? So in groups, you need to figure out what's the thesis, Nixon's thesis, and what is your idea of the ranking in the top 3 or 4, which are the most important, the most prevalent. And then you would write that down there. So we've done this at home, and now we're going to help each other. Then at the end of the hour, I'm going to come back and explain again what we're doing for next time. So questions or comments about what we're doing now, just like we did last time. Okay. We have 7 of us. So I'm going to get us in groups of 2. You know, it worked out last time that we did 1. Did that work okay, or should we get in smaller groups? Is it better everyone or just some people left out?
I don't have a problem with either one, honestly. I couldn't tell you.
Okay, let's get in 2 groups. Okay, so I am going to assign them. And this is our tradition. This will be really quick because there's so few of us. And we're back. Okay, so what I want us to do now is I want someone to read your what you think Nixon's thesis is. And let's all think about it and say, does that cover everything Nixon is saying? And then maybe someone will say, well, it doesn't cover this. And then someone else could say, well, I have a thesis. And so by this process, we can think about Nixon's thesis. So who wants to volunteer a relatively short sentence that you think is Nixon's thesis that would cover all of Nixon's speech?
I mean, if no one else wants to do it, I will.
Do it, Skylar. Crush
Okay.
it.
So I think his thesis is that he's an honest man who did nothing morally wrong and that he should stay on the ballot for the Republican Party.
Good. That's good and short and powerful. Is there anything that it leaves out? That really good thesis? Is there parts of the speech that is left out?
I mean, it doesn't encase like a lot of what he talks about because a lot of it is just like him blabbering in a way. I
Mhm.
think it does encase a lot of what the important part of it is because like in a lot of his blabbering, the only point he's trying to make is that he's honest and like you should trust him.
Okay, so the second part of your thesis was that he should stay on the ticket. Well, that could be a broader sense of, I'm going to throw out the communists, I'm going to throw out the corruptors, only Eisenhower can save America. And, okay, so if all of that is in the second part and the other part is in the first part, good thesis. Other ideas, other theses you want to give it a go? Because people can have a different thesis, different synthesis for the same material. That's good. Someone else want to give it a go? Other ideas? Skylar's so good, I guess. Okay, well, let's jump to brainstorming on some of the biggest flaws and logical fallacies that Nixon uses. And we're going to try to boil them down to 2 or 3 or 4, but you may have a different 3 or 4 than someone else. So let's just throw out, brainstorm some fallacies or bad argumentation Nixon uses that is pretty important to his speech.
I have a question about this one.
Yeah.
So can we group together like, okay, whenever I was putting mine together, right, I said that he makes false appeals to pathos and ethos as one. Like I put that as like he makes false appeals to pathos, ethos, and I put a comma.
You can do that.
Okay.
You can
Because I feel
kind
like
of,
that lets me get more in, you know what I mean?
you're the writer. You can sort of shoehorn things in a little bit, right? That gives you a broader latitude. Of course, as you're analyzing them, you'll discuss all of them. But I mean, it's good at the beginning to say these are some major ones. Okay, so appeals to pathos and ethos, false appeals. What else? What other big bad argumentation or fallacies he uses that are kind of important?
He has the red herring.
Yeah, the last half of the essay is red herring. What else? Other ideas?
Was there any circular logic?
Yes, he has some real circular logic. I won't quit because I'm not a quitter, right? I mean, that's a circular logic. It's circular logic to say, I will quit if the Republican Party tells me to quit. Please tell the Republican Party you want me. And in any case, I'm not going to quit. I'm going to campaign. I mean, that's weirdly self-contradictory or circular or something. What else?
This is something that isn't a major point, but I wanted to ask about it. Do you think he stereotypes a lot in this? Because I think he stereotypes like the Irish right, but he also stereotypes the Democrats a lot, like subtly though.
Absolutely attacking the Democrats by stereotyping them. You know, they're communist sympathizers, they're corrupt, they're all rich, their wives wear mink coats. I mean, he implies that they wear mink coats by saying a good Republican cloth coat, right? Yes, a lot of stereotyping, even poisoning the well, right? An argument to the man sometimes. Good, excellent. What else? I suppose you could point out that giant self-contradiction at the beginning where he says, what I did was wrong and illegal. But in the next 2 sentences, but it was neither wrong nor illegal. I mean, that was an accident, but it's still in the speech.
Yeah. I think the biggest one, but I feel like this is kind of the biggest one with all of them, is that he makes assertions without evidence. So it's begging the question.
Begging the question. And really, Hitler does a lot of begging the question, doesn't he? So just know that almost any time someone's trying to get away with something verbally, a lot of it's begging the question. Excellent. So we've mentioned, I don't know, 6 or 7 of them there. And you might want to put the ones you consider the most important, 3 or 4 in your thesis. Okay, well, let's take a look and see what's coming up next. You guys did a really great job, by the way. You always do. You're the cream of the crop. You're the one that I record. Plus, you're so darn beautiful. Okay, so next time we're going to do 5.4D. And this is where please review the assignment for writing an analysis essay in our course packet and here in the UCO's D2L, because you have to understand what the assignment is to see if a student writing an essay fulfills that assignment. So please reread that. Then you're going to read theta, student theta, we're calling the student theta, a previous essay analyzing Hitler's chapter. And then you're going to fill out the analysis papers evaluation sheet. We're going to call that the analysis rubric. Then you're going to read Iota's essay analyzing Nixon's speech. That's in the course packet. I'll show you where. And then you're going to fill out the analysis evaluation sheet below or in the packet. And you're going to upload it. So you could use it, the rubric here, but I think it actually turns out better here. So this is a broad overview of the assignment. You're going to have an introduction. You're going to have a thesis that follows this format. You're going to cover all of Hitler's or Nixon's document going in order of his arguments. You're going to summarize a little bit. You're going to label it. Then you're going to analyze it. Then you're going to summarize the next bit and label the fallacy and analyze the fallacy, showing why it fits that label. So that's the assignment for the students. This is the same sort of order. And then you're going to cursor down to page 61 in our course packet. And you will say a student we're calling theta tried to analyze Hitler's essay. Afterwards is a really good look. This is actually better than in our D2L. It gives us broader margins. You're going to fill this out for student theta. Then you're going to read student Iota's analysis of Nixon. And then you're going to fill out this analysis rubric about Nixon. And then we have more for when you do this yourself for in-class revisions. And so that's the process, and you'll upload it to 5.4D. It's a dry run of in-class revisions. Questions or comments about that? You know what we're doing and where we're going? And that will take us to spring break. Then over spring break, you will write your analysis essay of either Hitler or Nixon, your choice.
I have one question. So we can copy paste the thing in the course packet for
Yes.
like a checklist and use that.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I wrote it and I'm giving you permission to use it for free. So live it up. You're not violating any copyright because I'm the author. Other questions? And for which I make so much money, by the way. I spent huge amounts of money doing that book because I had to pay people to edit it and things. But I give it to students for free. Why? I'm an idiot. That's why. Other questions, comments? Okay, you guys are awesome. I will see you on Wednesday. Have fun reading at previous student essays. Salute you out.